Hi, welcome to the Art Center of Burlington. We just finished an incredible opening of our Entartete Kunst exhibition here at the Art Center. This past Friday night, we had a full house concert here where we explored the music of Django Reinhardt, who was a jazz musician during the same time period. And we heard great music. We learned about the life and the legacy of Django Reinhardt and the historical context in which he lived and wrote and performed his music, and it was really, really special. And surrounded by the audience was this exhibit that we opened last week as well that I'd love to give a little walkthrough. So right here on our main wall is kind of where it all starts. So when we say degenerate, what we're talking about in this context is artwork that was deemed dangerous and that was censored by the Nazis prior to World War II. And this series of shame exhibitions, what they called shame exhibitions, where they confiscated artwork of some of the greatest artists of all time and put these artworks on display to denounce these artists, denounce their artwork, and show their version of what they deemed acceptable artwork for Germans to take in and what they deemed unacceptable. So just walking along this, in front of this wall for a moment, we have a speech that was given by Hitler at the opening of his great house of German art that opened in 1937 in Munich, a building where he wanted to house what was considered culturally acceptable artwork. So traditional, very realistic artwork depicting perfect German traditional values and life and farm life. And this was the speech that he gave to denounce all artwork that was outside of that boundary. So we're talking artists like Otto Dix, Pablo Picasso, Kandinsky, Kokoschka, all of the greats that we know today that were dabbling in different movements of art. So Cubism, Dadaism, different forms of abstraction that under Nazi cultural policy was deemed degenerate and was blamed for the decay of society. So right across the street from the Great German Art Museum was one of the most famous of these shame exhibitions, Entartete Kunst, that happened in July of 1937 in Munich, where hundreds of artwork were on display, where the public came to see them. And we can walk across to this other wall, and I can kind of show you how this artwork was portrayed to Europe. One really important thing to note is when we talk about what degenerate means in this context, it wasn't that this artwork was universally thought to be bad or not good. We're talking about the greatest artwork that was considered the greatest at the time, and of course today. Degenerate meant that it wasn't worthy to the Germans or to the Nazis. It was considered reprehensible. It was considered to be the cause of social decay was this artwork. So that's what we mean when we talk degenerate. And one thing that we really wanted to highlight in this exhibit was the use of propaganda. And so what you see in this exhibit is a lot of the propaganda posters that were advertising these degenerate art exhibitions throughout Europe. And the use of propaganda to change perception and to put a negative connotation on these artists by design through propaganda. And one really, really cool part of this whole project was we got to sit down with students, high school students and college students, and talk about what is propaganda, what was it then, how was it used then, and how we might see that today, and how propaganda can be used in various forms. And when a government starts to control culture, how propaganda can be used as a tool for that. And one other thing that we wanted to incorporate, you'll walk through the exhibit and you'll see photographs of Germans going to see these shows. And we kind of recreated an iconic moment from one of those that you'll see in a larger photo here. When the Nazis put these, curated, if you will, these exhibitions, they slapped this artwork on the walls. Some of this artwork didn't even have frames. There were lots of derogatory slogans that were painted above the artwork. This was a way to really denounce these artists and shame them and humiliate them and put them on public trial, and to showcase how they didn't think that this artwork was of any value. And so we tried to really hone in on that and show examples of that and just the extent to which the Nazis went to humiliate these artists. Many of these artists lost their jobs, they lost their positions at schools and universities. They were told that they could not practice art anymore. Some were told that they couldn't buy art supplies anymore. So there was a lot of control put on these artists at the time. One thing we thought would be important to incorporate in this exhibit was actual video footage of people entering the actual 1937 exhibit in Munich. So in part of the gallery, you'll get to actually watch video footage of the artwork that was on display and people going to see it. And it really gives you a sense of being there and what it would be like to be there. They wanted it to feel stifling. They wanted it to feel chaotic. So you really get to see how they installed the artwork and the disrespect, obviously, that they showed to these artists and their work. And this gives you a really, really good example of that. In this exhibit, you'll also find documents. So we have the actual Volume 1 and Volume 2 inventory. So the Nazis took meticulous inventory of all the artwork that they confiscated, over 16,000 pieces of artwork. And you can actually read through the list of that, of where they took this from various collectors, museums, the artists themselves. And there's also symbols that reflect whether they were going to sell the artwork. Much of the artwork was actually sold off because it was known to be valuable, as it was, to actually fund the Nazi party, or a lot of the artwork was actually burned. So you'll see documents and things here that discuss that form of censorship and the extent to which the Nazis went to destroying this artwork, banning it from the public, burning it, destroying it, and unfortunately, much of this artwork is no longer in existence. There's a large portion of this exhibit that we dedicated to discussion of gypsies. That was a lot to do with our music program that we did this past weekend, where we discussed the treatment of gypsies. Django Reinhardt was a jazz musician and a gypsy, both of which were considered degenerate at the time. And we stumbled across this incredible archive where we pulled some letters that gypsies had written with some translations of the letters and some context. That was really important to us to incorporate when we were discussing and celebrating the incredible music. There was actually a Degenerate music exhibition that happened alongside the Entartete Kunst exhibition. So we have documents of composers and musicians that were also exiled and put on public trial for doing what artists do, and that is expressing the realities of the world that they were living in. And I think that the main thing that we want to get across in this exhibit is, if there's ever a question whether or not art matters, I think that this is a perfect example of why it does. It always has and it always will. We look to artists to show us the world that we're living in and to hold a mirror up to what we're facing and going through. And it's really important that we protect artistic freedom and that we're aware of when it's happening, even if we don't realize that it is, because we rely on artists to depict the world the way that it is. This was a great way for us to have conversations about what censorship looks like. Ultimately, the goal of this exhibition is not necessarily to draw equivalencies in our world today, but to have discussions and real discussions and think about the relationship between art and power and how that relationship works and coexists. We want to say a thank you to the Community Foundation of Des Moines County for making this exhibition possible, and for the community that has come out in big numbers to take this in and to have interesting, meaningful conversations. We're very fortunate to have a space like this where we can have dialogue with different perspectives perspectives and think deeply and put ourselves in other people's shoes. And this subject matter and this moment in history is an important one to learn about and reflect on, and keep in the backs of our minds as we move through this world and when we deal with our fellow humans.